Welcome to Techstination. Joining us is Matt Frazer, Lumix Business Development Manager at Panasonic. Thank you for joining us again, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
And the reason you're here is another new camera from Panasonic. This time something a little different. I guess maybe more than a little different, the Lumix BGH1. Give us a description of this camera.
Well, this is really the first Lumix camera that was built from the ground up to be a video-only camera, whereas most of our other products have been either photo or hybrids. So it allowed us to remove a lot of restrictions in the design, and ultimately we decided we would build what's called a box-styled camera. So it's almost a perfect cube in its shape. There are certain advantages to using a box style. First off, we can make it small, lightweight, and compact. This camera weighs less than any of our GH model cameras, even though it has more capabilities than those cameras. It also allowed us to do things like incorporate a fan into the design to give it unlimited recording capabilities in all frame rates and all resolutions. And for resolutions, the camera can support up to cinema 4K resolutions, which is 4096 pixels wide by 2160 pixels tall. It can do that up to 60 frames per second and even give you access to 10-bit video or 10-bit 422 video at 400 megabits per second, which that just means really, really robust codecs. So this is a professional-grade camera with cinema-quality images, but it also has lots of production capabilities. The camera includes a port that's probably new to some of your listeners called an SDI port. SDI is an industry-standard connector for transmitting video for broadcast, live event, and production work. So you have that port available on the camera now. We also include a timecode port and a standard BNC connector, so we can give it the correct time to match other cameras. And one of the coolest additions is gen lock or generational lock. What this does is it makes sure all the cameras are in the exact same shutter sync. So for applications like VR, or if we're doing volumetric capture, or if we're building arrays kind of like the Matrix where they do that bullet time look, we can make sure all the cameras are perfectly in sync, which makes post-production a much easier work for productions.
What are the physical dimensions of the camera?
It's roughly 93 millimeters wide, 93 millimeters tall, and I believe it's 78 millimeters deep. So it is pretty tiny. And then in terms of weight, it's right around 535 grams, so very, very lightweight. And by having it be this perfect cube size, if you're going to put it onto a gimbal or a drone, it's very easy to keep it perfectly balanced. You don't have that hand grip to the right that has to be compensated for as you're balancing it out. And then we're also taking into account streaming applications. Obviously, in the world we live in right now, streaming has become more and more important. Obviously, this camera was designed well before, COVID-19 and the pandemic. And back then, we were still planning to have streaming functionality. So we incorporated an Ethernet port along with USB-C. So the Ethernet port in particular is going to be very useful as we develop the firmware for the camera. Initially, you'll be able to power the camera over Ethernet using PoE+. So you can run a single Ethernet wire to the camera and power it. You can control it from the Lumix Tether for Multicam app. And you can actually control up to 12 of these cameras from that application. And you can also stream video out of the camera through the Ethernet port into the Lumix Tether for Multicam app. At present, that video is going to be roughly it's about 1280 by 960 or 1280 by 720, depending on the aspect ratio you choose. But then there'll be a future firmware update that'll add support for something called RTSP or RTP. These are internet streaming protocols. And while we haven't confirmed the resolutions yet, I can promise you they'll be class-leading in terms of what the product will be capable of.
Really interesting move there. And this is, we should say, a Micro Four Thirds system camera.
Correct, but because, again, it's not for photography, we were able to reconsider the type of sensor we use. So usually in a Micro Four Thirds camera, you're getting a 20 megapixel sensor that's good for photography and good for video. What we've done is we've used a 10.2 megapixel sensor because it's exactly 4096 pixels wide, which is the exact width we need for Cinema 4K. Also, the sensor is physically larger than a Micro Four Thirds sensor. It's about a 1/8 crop instead of a 2 crop. So we can give you bigger pixels. The pixels are twice the size of what we would put in a 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds camera. Bigger pixels mean better low light sensitivity. They also mean better dynamic range. In fact, this is the highest dynamic range we've ever been able to produce in a Micro Four Thirds camera. Dynamic range is measured in stops, and we can give you now 13 stops of dynamic range, where in past designs were almost 12 stops of dynamic range. So this camera is very good in challenging lighting conditions where you might have backlit subjects and shadowy foreground objects. You'll have a lot of latitude to be able to work with the files. And because of that lesser resolution, we can ask this sensor to output at faster speeds. So 4K 60p is not a problem, but we can also give you 1080 at 240 frames per second, which is an incredibly slow-mo function in the camera.
Now, even though there is an Ethernet port, there is Wi-Fi as well, and Bluetooth and dual SD card slots. Is there a battery in this?
So the camera will ship with a wall adapter for powering it. It works with the batteries we would use for many of our cinema cameras, like the EVA 1, like our camcorders, like the X1500 and X2000. It works on those batteries, but because it can be powered over Ethernet or it can be AC powered, and we see a lot of applications where it's going to be powered in those ways, we felt it was more important to give it an AC adapter than to give it a battery. So batteries will be purchased as an external accessory. We just didn't want to we don't want to force people to have to purchase a battery that they may never have to use.
Interesting. So who are the typical users, do you think, for this camera? Where do you think your market is?
God, that is a tough one to answer. I equate this camera to being like a multi-tool, on a construction site, because it can do so many things so well. I think if you're a cinematographer, it produces cinematic-looking results. So if you want to do documentary work, or if you need a B or C camera to get pickups and coverage for a production, it absolutely works for that, and it'll give you a great image. Plus, with time code and Genlock, it makes it easier to sync. If you're a YouTuber who knows you're going to be venturing into doing live streams, this is going to be one of the best live stream cameras you could possibly get your hands on. If for no other reason, you have full control over the camera from your computer. So as you're filming yourself, you can make all the adjustments right from the Lumix Tether for Multicam app. So for that application, it's phenomenal. But I think a lot of broadcasters or live event productions are going to take interest in this because, frankly, to include Genlock and an SDI port at a $2,000 price point with this kind of image quality is kind of unheard of. So it makes a very inexpensive solution for multiple camera setups. So if I have a church, a house of worship, if I've got live event spaces, or if I'm doing recorded broadcasts, because I have the internal recording capabilities, but all the ability to control the camera, all those applications would have uses for a box camera like this.
I was going to ask you about the price, but you gave it away, about $2,000. And it's arriving when? Later this year, right?
Yeah, we should have them out by December, so it should be ready, especially for corporations to be able to put that on their taxes for this year.
Really interesting. And once again, this is using the Micro Four Thirds system. Are there certain lenses that Panasonic is going to recommend for this camera?
Well, naturally, we're going to recommend using Panasonic lenses with it. But the truth is that the Micro Four Thirds Alliance has many members. The camera's fully compatible with all the lenses that are in the system. So it works exactly the same way as a GH5 would work in that regard. The autofocus system has been dramatically improved. But frankly, every one of the Micro Four Thirds lenses that's on the Olympus, that's by Olympus or Panasonic, they all have autofocus control and will work fully with this product. But even manual control lenses from companies like Vedra, SLR Magic, there's a ton of different companies that are making lenses for the product. I think of the crop sensor products that are out there, Nobody has a more complete lens assortment than Micro Four Thirds.
And as far as using microphones, external microphones with this, you've got people will have all they need, right?
Yeah, so it comes with a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack and microphone jack on the back of the camera. It also has full compatibility with our XLR1, which is an adapter that goes in the Tahachi on the top, and that gives you channel 1 and channel 2 XLR audio, and it's exceptionally high quality audio. So yeah, you absolutely have all of that compatibility.
And from what I can see from the ISO, the low light capability is pretty impressive too.
Yeah, and that's a combination of the larger diodes, as we mentioned earlier. You know, each photo site's twice the size of what we normally put in. And then we have our dual native ISO system, which comes from the VariCam, which is our $40,000 cinema camera. That gives us a low native ISO. That just means an ISO point that we promise the highest dynamic range and the lowest noise. You know, when you design a sensor, there's a sweet spot where the sensor has one ISO that gives you the best dynamic range and lowest noise. What we've done is do that at a second circuit at a higher value. In this case, the low point's 400, the high point's 2000. It effectively resets the gain. Cameras use gain to create amplification. When we get to ISO 2000, it resets the gain, and we get a new starting point from there up. So the camera is exceptionally good in low light, especially for a Micro Four Thirds sensor.
Terrific. Where's the best place for people to go for more info?
I would recommend shop.panasonic.com. That's the best place to go. And one final note on the camera, and this is kind of fresh off the presses, we have released something called an SDK, or a software development kit, for the camera, which means that third parties can write software for this camera. That SDK was just released yesterday on the 14th. So people can download that SDK if they want to write software for the camera.
Terrific. Nice move. The camera, again, is the Lumix BGH1 from Panasonic. Matt Frazer, thank you for taking the time with us.
Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Now this. It takes a lot of listening to build a better radio, and that's just what the folks at C. Crane have done. Bob Crane and his crew, nestled among the rivers and tallest trees in the world in Fortuna, California, have made a habit of listening to their customers. And that's just what they've done in building the CC Skywave SSB, the Swiss Army knife of portable radios. For everyday listening to AM or FM in the yard or patio or on the nightstand without having to drain a mobile phone battery, it's a great companion. But it is also a companion equipped for NOAA weather information and alerts that can be life-saving. You can listen to FEMA and Coast Guard transmissions too. Beyond all of that, you can tune into shortwave signals from around the world. It's compact, easy to take with you, and built to last. The CC Skywave SSB. Click on the link at Techstination.com.